Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military of Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 24 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And one thing I can tell you for sure, that the Russians are preparing something, that something huge is brewing in Russia's minds. You know that something big is going to happen, and this is going to be something unbelievable and something that we haven't seen probably since the beginning of the special military operation, or at least for a very long period of time. The Russians are about to launch their major offensive operation with the purpose to take under complete control the rest of the Donetsk region by the end of the 2025. And most likely, and according to updates we are receiving this morning, the Russians are going to begin their major offensive operation from the triangle of the cities like Slaviansk, Lyman and Siversk. So the Siversk is the target number one for the armed forces of the Russian Federation according to the most latest reports. But before we start with this major offensive operation, first let's talk about another massive missile and drone attack that took place during the previous night. As you may know, the Russians attacked Ukraine, probably not just Ukraine, but all over the entire territory Ukraine with a significant number of drones. Ukrainian sources are saying that more than 800 drones were recorded. So this is another record that was established by the Russians, or anti-record more precisely. As you can see, we have the map of approximate routes of Russian attacks, and as you can see, the Russians attacked almost every single square kilometer in the central and in the eastern parts of Ukraine. As you can see, according to this map, the Russians didn't attack the western part of Ukraine. So the explosions, rockets, missiles, drones were recorded in the cities of Kiev, Zhytomyr, Odessa, Kryvyi Rog, Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro, Cherkasy, Poltava, Kharkiv, Sumy. So once again, almost every single square kilometer was attacked. During the night, we were receiving lots of updates about where exactly the missiles were flying, where exactly the drones were flying, where exactly the first explosions were recorded. And by the morning of the 7th of July, we start receiving first videos and photos of consequences of Russian attack. In this video, we can see a multi-storage building that was almost reduced to ruins as a result of Russian drone or missile attack. In this video, we can see a smoke screen above the city of Kiev. This video was published this morning. Heavy smoke after Russian missile strike. Close windows tightly if possible. That was stated by local Telegram channels suggesting people to close their windows. This is the video that we got also this morning, and here we can see the moment when the Russians probably attacked some warehouse or ammo depot, and we can see very heavy explosion. Then we can see the work of air defense missile or another missile strike. So something big was attacked on the territory of the city of Kiev. Lots of explosions were recorded, and now we can see huge smoke screen above the city of Kiev. This is another video somewhere in the vicinity of Ukrainian Parliament and the Independence Square. So another smoke screen, another building or facility was attacked and damaged by the Russians. But you know that, of course, all these explosions, all these strikes give us a very interesting picture probably, but all these pictures, all these videos are not important when talking about another strike in comparison with another strike that the Russians carry out in the central part of Ukraine. Of course, all these explosions are important, of course, but when talking about targets, today, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians attacked the bridge. The first bridge was attacked by the Russians in the area of the city by the name of Kremenchuk in the central part of Ukraine. So this is the video. This is exactly the moment when the Russians attacked the bridge, Kremenchuk-Kryukovsky bridge, between the western and the eastern banks of the river of Dnipro. Here we can see civilians were most likely were fishing, and then they start watching how Russians attacked the bridge. Very heavy explosion, as you can see, was recorded. And this morning we got a picture where we can see consequences of this attack. As you can see, the bridge wasn't destroyed. destroyed. The bridge was just damaged, but it's not important. It's not the question whether the Russians wanted to destroy the bridge or not. The most important is that the Russians were trying to send a message to Ukrainians with the purpose to force them to begin real talks with the Russian Federation and to accept Russia's demands. Because if they don't do this, most likely the Russians will destroy this bridge, or at least they will attack this bridge every single night, and sooner or later this will lead to probably unfixable consequences for the bridge. So why the Russians chose this bridge? The answer to this question is very simple. This bridge is located around the city of Kremenchuk, and here we have the biggest oil refinery of Ukraine, Kremenchuk's oil refinery. Oil storage that Ukrainians use to supply their forces on the eastern bank of the river of Dnipro, to supply their contingent along the line of combat contact in the Donbas direction, in the Kupiansk direction, in the Kharkiv and Sumy directions, which means that if Russians can destroy this bridge, which most likely Ukraine used to transfer oil to this oil refinery plant, then this will lead probably to unpredictable consequences for Ukrainian probably logistic for their fuel storages, and obviously this will lead to unpredictable consequences to the situation on the ground. I can tell you for sure that Ukrainians, if they have no fuel for their tanks and vehicles, will not be able to carry out successful defense operation during the upcoming major battle with the Russian forces in the Donbas region. Once again, the bridge wasn't destroyed during the previous night, it was just damaged, but now we are entering the decisive part, because if Russians repeat their attack this upcoming night, most likely they will try to destroy this bridge within the next 2, 3 or 4 weeks or something like this. This will be enough for the Russians, enough of time for the Russians to probably prepare themselves before another wave of attack in the area of Donbas. Now let's return back once again to Kiev and let's discuss these numbers. This is the report that was published by Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, where we can see the work or the results of work of Ukrainian air defense according to Ukrainian sources. According to this picture, we see that Russians used more than 800 air vehicles, more precisely 880 vehicles, drones and missiles altogether. And once again, as I told you several minutes ago, this is another anti-record established by the Russians, the biggest attack ever since the beginning of the special military operation. Obviously, this is a very probably tough, very important signal that the Russians sent to Ukrainians before the beginning of the Russian major offensive operation. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. We have lots of very interesting updates, and first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the armed forces of the Russian Federation improved their positions significantly in the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction. By the morning of the 7th of September of 2025, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. First of all, the Russians took every single square meter along the river of Volcha on the Russian side of the river between the settlements of Novoselovka and Alexandergrad. Furthermore, the armed forces of the Russian Federation continue advancing from the line of Maliyivka-Kamyshevacha in the western direction with the purpose to attack the settlements of Ternova, Sosnovka, Хороша. So the Russians continue their offensive, and the Russians have already passed 50% of the pass between the river of Mokre Yale and the road R85, and the Russians continue advancing. The Russians are bombing different positions and the strongholds of the armed forces of Ukraine on their roads of attack. During the previous 24 hours, lots of explosions and attacks were recorded around settlements and villages in this direction of attack. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, nothing special was recorded. Pro-Ukrainian resources published the video of that took place almost 9 days ago, and here we can see how Ukrainians, if you remember, were attacking Russian vehicles that were trying to get as close as possible to the city of Mirnograd. In this video, we can see that the vehicle, as a result of several attacks, was destroyed, but this video doesn't show us attacks on Russian infantry, which means that most likely Russians managed to land in this area and to take these territories under complete control. At the same time, the Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation in the area of Breakthrough. The Ukrainians managed to improve their positions and to restore control at least over 40% of the settlement of Zaporizhzhia, and Ukrainians managed to restore control over the settlement by the name of Vladimirovka. So these reports were provided by different neutral mappers, and from this picture we can see that the Ukrainians most likely will try to continue their offensive operation further in the direction of the village by the name of Mayak from the west and from the northeast, with the purpose to cut Russians in the area of Kucherov Yar to the north and to cut the Russians in Koldrun. The Russians understand the plans of the armed forces of Ukraine, so that is why they're doing everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to do this. Currently, there are very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians are attacking from three directions. The Russians are trying to hold their positions. This is very important battle, but one thing I can tell you for sure, that currently Ukrainians, in their attempts to cut this pocket, to cut this breakthrough, are suffering huge losses, because now the Ukrainians are counter-attacking and the Russians attack them with FPV drones, and the Russians are, let's say, defending themselves on the former positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area between the cities of Siversk, Lyman and Slaviansk. The sources are saying that the Russians are going to begin their major offensive operation exactly from this direction. The second day in a row, we receive additional updates about another kill zone that was created, and we are talking about MO3 highway between the city of Izum and the city of Slaviansk. The Russians established complete FPV drone control over this territory, and the Russians currently don't allow Ukrainians to use this logistic artillery to supply and support their contingent in the cities of Lyman and Siversk. The Ukrainians, according to several neutral mappers, tried to counterattack Russian positions on the territory of the village of Serebryanka, and they managed to restore control over some territories. At the same time, several pro-Russian resources reported today they confirmed this information, that the clashes and the battles currently are taking place for the settlement of Yampol. So the battle for the village of Yampol has begun. The Russians are trying to cut this territory into pieces and then to move further in different directions to attack the city of Lyman from the southeast and to attack the city of Siversk from the northwest as well. So the Russians are trying to break through exactly in this area and then to attack Ukrainians from behind on their main strongholds. At the same time, the Russians continue offensive operation in the area of the settlement by the name of Shandrigolova. So as you can see, we have changes on the ground. This is the situation, for example, by the end of the 4th of even by the end of the 3rd of September of 2025, and this is approximately the moment when the Russians launched their major offensive. By the end of the 4th of September, we got reports that the Russians secured additional fields between Dobryshovo and Stavki. By the end of the 5th of September, this information was confirmed based on the video published by the 66th Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. By the end of the 6th of September, pro-Ukrainian resources of 3rd Corps, a military corps, published this video how they were counter-attacking Russians between the villages of Novoselovka and Shandrigolova. Ukrainians using vehicles were counter-attacking and attacking Russian positions within a very close distance. These episodes took place exactly in this area. Based on this video, we came to the conclusion that indeed the Russians entered the village of Dirilova, and by the beginning of the 7th of September, the Russians took under control additional 3 lines and strongholds in the direction of the city of Lyman. So now the Russians are using very interesting tactics, because as we can see, we still haven't received anything about the village of Shandrigolova. We're talking about Russian control over this territory, but at the same time we start receiving updates further from the southern direction, from the settlement of Shandrigolova, which means that the Russians blocked the village, but they decided not to waste time to take the village under control, and the Russians began advancing further. So the Russians blocked the village and moved further, which means that the Russians are in a hurry and they don't want to waste time, they don't want to waste manpower and resources for securing this territory, because they understand that this is not an important village. The Russians preferred to move further, and they decided just to establish probably strong siege, blockade of the settlement, and to continue offensive. This is very important. The Russians are in a hurry, which means Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern directions. According to information we have, during the previous 24-48 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the Volchansk direction. Huge territories in the area of the settlement of Sinelniko were taken by the Russians. Furthermore, according to information we have, 1st Battalion Reconnaissance Group managed to enter the village, and currently the clashes are taking place on the territory of this settlement. The Russians are tasked to finish the battle for the city of Volchansk, and the Russians are tasked to take under complete control these territories that the Russians lost in 2022 during Ukrainian greatest counteroffensive operation by the name of Kharkiv counteroffensive. So everything has begun. One thing is clear. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. But obviously the next weeks, months are going to be very, very interesting and very, very hot. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.